Might start with James Morrow, who's probably what you'd regard as a critic of Joe Biden. So I'll let you have first say, James.
Well, Andrew, it was a pretty interesting speech we saw today, more for what Joe Biden didn't say than what he did. I mean, let's all remember that Joe Biden is going into this speech in a tremendously disadvantaged position. He's got catastrophic poll numbers that are bleeding through to the Democrats, which means that the Democrats, if something does not change, are going to be absolutely wiped out at the midterm elections in November. Yet his speech was, aside from the first act, which was this sort of taking credit for, a victory in Ukraine that hasn't occurred yet, essentially, and even during that, he managed to call the Ukrainians the Iranian people. So yes, I don't know. Is there now a no-fly zone or a Tehran we're enforcing? I don't know. There was this sort of weird long laundry list of things that was more about omissions than commissions. There were a bunch of announceables in there, but, he talks about inflation, but he doesn't talk about his own administration's role in printing money and driving costs up. He talks about bringing back manufacturing in an almost Trumpian sort of sense, and yet he doesn't talk about increasing domestic energy production. It was really remarkable, I think, for the things that were not in the speech as it was for the things that were.
Well, I've got to say, everyone talks about manufacturing, including in Australia, and nothing happens. Barbara Heineback, what was your view? I'm sure you'll have a counter view to James.
Actually, I couldn't agree with James more.
Wow.
One of my first comments was going to be, the elephant in the room was not mentioned. And it was the fact that I really felt, I was wondering for the last few weeks, how in the world is Biden going to be able to give a State of the Union address, this annual opportunity to talk about your successes and a few major points of where you're going to take the country over the coming year. Instead of doing that, I thought he had a safety net since he had such a poor accomplishment record. I really thought he was going to take the Ukraine and Russia issue, as sad as it is, as a safety net, kind of like a get out of jail free card, because he's got about 37% of approval in America right now. His domestic policies are kind of non-existent or they're failing. Inflation is going through the roof, and he didn't talk about that. We were just about, the USA, energy free under Donald Trump. And then he started that Keystone pipeline, which was bringing crude oil down through Canada into the U.S., would have begun thousands of jobs, could have been refined and meant, Alabama and Mississippi. I've been away from home too long. And he could have talked about what he's going to do to support families with education. He mentioned the infrastructure, but what was started out to be a $3 trillion bill ended up getting whittled down to a little more than $1 trillion, thank heaven. But of that $1.7 trillion or whatever it was of the $1 trillion tax infrastructure bill, only 7% of that infrastructure is going to go to infrastructure, bridges, dams, highways, that sort of thing, which we sorely need. And instead, he's talking about mother's care and all of these other things, which are worthy to be taken care of, but you have separate bills for that. Why didn't he mention something about the 600,000 barrels of oil we're getting from Russia every day now, when we were energy independent and the U.S. was also able to support our NATO members? He mentioned nothing about Sweden and Finland, who are thinking about coming into NATO, but they've already showed their support toward the Ukraine right now, and so many other opportunities he missed. I thought that this would have been an out for him to say something about Afghanistan I didn't expect an overall apology, but I did expect him to say, even though that wasn't handled as well as it could have been, of course, we all know it was a horrible disaster.
Barbara Heineback, from what you're saying, he's gone. He's a lame duck president. That's the end of him. Would you go that far? Can you see him coming back from this?
It was was a disaster. I still think they're going to let him creep through until the end of his term. He did say goodbye to Beyer, who is the outgoing Supreme Court justice, and bringing in a Black American woman. She'll be the first Black American, I think the third African American who will be on the bench if she is approved to the Supreme Court. He mentioned that, but he didn't talk about value added and what is it that he's going to try to do, maybe bring up something, because the parents, for instance, really started to take back the schools and they want input into what their youngsters are being taught. I felt his speech, to me, reminded me of a revival meeting, preaching to the choir, and left all of the naysayers outside instead of talking about a few major challenges and how he plans to accomplish those. And I say they'll keep him because what do you have? You know, out of the fire into the, what is it? Out of the frying pan into the fireplace. So, yeah.
Wow. Okay, James Morrow, I thought you were going to open up. I should have started with Barbara. So if I could...
Hi, James.
James, can I just ask, I mean, obviously Volodymyr Zelensky was looking for a very strong statement of support. We had Joe Siracusa on earlier, the academic, saying, oh, well, it's like, you know, we're helping you, but we're not helping you. Is that sort of your view of things, or did he have enough there in terms of what he was promising and what he was saying in terms of Putin?
Again, I think that what he said has to be seen in the context of the whole speech and the fact that, you know, there wasn't enough in the rest of the speech there to support anything more full-throated on Ukraine. Yes, he was very, you know, inspiring and talking about that first act of the speech, you know, was very hopeful. I think it was an exercise in, you know, a lot of wishful thinking about what may happen, you know, with Vladimir Putin and the situation in Ukraine. But I also think that, to give him some credit, or his advisors some credit, there was a very careful, measured attempt there not to say anything that would suggest that they're going to put in U.S. troops that might wind up facing off against Russian troops, which, of course, would be a catastrophic escalation of this scenario. So give his administration some credit for being at least a bit realist about that. But that said, to go back to what Barbara said, you know, about the rest of the speech, she called it a tent revival meeting. Well, I think a tent revival meeting would be inspiring. And I didn't see anything, you know, that particularly inspiring in there. There were not a lot of hallelujahs. And even the CNN people I was watching before this were having trouble saying amen to this. It was not, it was a speech that was a list of kind of announceables. You know, a lot of things worthy, you know, diabetes medication, childcare, great, lovely, wonderful, typical Democrat laundry list sort of things. But again, there's this huge elephant in the room, I think Barbara said, which is that the last year has been an absolute debacle.
James.
This has been a replay of the Carter administration.
James.
I was in the U.S. Oh, sorry, but it is, yeah.
James, I have to wrap it up there.
Okay.
But thanks so much to you and Barbara Heineback for your time.